Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Disgustingly Resilient podcast, Death Guard Fundamentals for 10th edition. This episode is going to be basically about the data slate update. I know it's a bit past the hour now for the data slate changes, but I thought it's correct to go back and make an amendment video to sort of highlight the changes, the impact that they've had on the army, and maybe changes to some of the do's and don'ts that I did say in the first episode, because it was such a large update. Lots changed for the army, so I think it's important to have this maybe minisode. We do have the allies breakdown coming up later this week. Me and Will are recording that. Just been hard to get our schedules to align, but that is coming up. So just a few things before we get into it. You might notice a bit of a difference in audio quality. That is because I have managed to get a new microphone and a proper one, thanks to the support of my members and any donations that people have given to me. I want you all to know the support has been insane on this channel, and honestly, it's blown me away, and I'm so happy I've managed to get something that's going to hopefully give back to the community with this microphone, making me sound a little less roboty and a little more clear. But yeah, for those who do show support to the channel, whether it's likes, subscribes, they mean massive amounts. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Join the Play Greens on the join button below if that interests you. There are perks for becoming a YouTube member, such as having access to a Discord that we've just launched. You get to vote on upcoming content. So the Perfect Plague series, you can vote for the next army that we're going to face. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone for the support. I have heard some feedback about me speaking too fast sometimes, so I'm going to try my best to be conscious of that and speak a little slower and a little clearer. I do apologise. I do just get very excited and very carried away when I talk about these things. As for upcoming content, sorry, this is a bit of an intro. I will put a skip in for anyone that's not interested in this. We've launched our Perfect Plague series, which is a matchup by matchup breakdown for the Death Guard faction. We had a live stream recently where we went over a Death Guard tier list. It's a bit silly, it's a bit daft, it's more of a fun stream, so that's there to catch up. We also had an interview with the other Death Guard players who managed to go 4-1 at the London Grand Tournament. Pierce and Sam Boardman. I'm trying to get the last one, Aaron from Vanguard Tactics. Check them out, they're great as well. I do work for them as well. And they have a great breakdown for how their event went. It's very different list to what I ran, very different tactics and strategies, and it's a jumbo episode. It's like 2 hours 30 long, but there's lots of good stuff to be learned in there. But anyway, let's get into why you're all here, which is for the Death Guard Fundamentals Data Slate update. So, what changed? Lots, to summarise. So the first thing that changed is that we obviously got massive points drops. Pretty much every single unit in our army got a points drop. Now obviously, in general, that means more units on the board, and it also changes how we look at how cost effective units are. Now, thankfully, I did do the unit breakdown after the changes and after we knew what the changes were. Therefore, that has been taken into consideration, so that video does not need redoing. But obviously, it does change how we think about the army overall, as being less elite and less expensive means we don't have to worry about making certain trades here and there. The big thing, though, obviously, is the new contagion effects. So, for those who don't know, our contagion, which is normally just -1 toughness, has received an upgrade, where before the battle, we can basically pick one of 3 powers, and they will enhance the contagion with additional effect. Also, obviously, the meta's changed with nerfs to some of the more powerful factions, buffs to the weaker factions, like ourselves. The meta has become it's become a lot better, I won't lie. Eldar is still a bit of a menace. Tau have been buffed and very strong at the moment, which is not great for Death Guard. However, in general, I feel like the game's in a much healthier point and much healthier place. We'll see if the codexes that are going to come out are going to upset that. But right now, I genuinely feel like we're seeing a lot more armies managing to go 4-1, 5-0, which is a great sign for where the meta's going. Obviously, there's still a few that need help, but hopefully we'll get there. But it's honestly, as Death Guard specifically, it's a great time to be joining the game right now. And obviously, more models means more power in general. So we get more models on the table. We can perform different combinations. We have access to more units to play the missions with, more units to trade with our opponents. So in general, Death Guard's power level has increased rather drastically, I'd say, with all these changes. So as I said just then, fantastic time if you are a Death Guard player, or maybe you were a Death Guard player and you decided to take a break during the not so great time that we had recently, then now is a great time to jump back in and try out the faction again and see if it's for you. Yeah. So the main change we're going to talk about this video is the spread the sickness change. So the one thing that's changed is our detachment rule. We have been given additional rules onto that. I just want to clarify firstly that we retain sticky objectives. It hasn't replaced it. It has been given in addition. So we still have army-wide sticky objectives, which is strong. It is very strong to have. Maybe not as game impactful as we'd hoped, but now with this new rule coming in, hopefully that's where the impact is coming from, and it definitely is. So we have gained an additional contagion effect, which is chosen game by game, so you're not locked in during the list building. You can see your opponent, see their army, see the list, and then during the declare reserves and deep strikes phase, you will select your contagion. Now that's great because obviously it gives flexibility. It means that a good general who learns these matchups, learns his own list, learns his opponent's lists, will be able to hopefully pick the correct contagion for each matchup, and that will give him or her an advantage in that game. It is cumulative with the -1 toughness. We have not lost -1 toughness. You have an aura that grows turn by turn, so 3 inches first turn, 6 inches second, 9 inches third, which is now -1 toughness and whichever additional effect, which we're going to go into, that you choose. As I said, it is chosen game by game. So, the new contagions in general. So, the first one we're looking at is a -1 weapon skill and -1 ballistic skill to everyone within contagion range of your models. The next one is -1 to the save characteristics of enemy models within range of contagion of your models. And the last one is -1 to leadership and up objective control value to enemy units within range of Death Guard models with this ability. So we're going to break them down. We're going to look at which one we should pick, why we should be picking it, and when maybe that is the best option, or maybe when we should be looking at other options. Okay. So I'm just going to quick drink. So when we look at these, we need to consider multiple factors. It's a lot of people ask me things like, Aiden, what do I take versus Necrons? Aiden, what do I take versus Space Marines? And the reality is, in some aspects, there is a general sense. Some should never be taken against certain ones. For example, if you're against Chaos Demons, -1 to their save is not going to do anything, given they're all invulnerables. However, if you just wanted to flex on them and prove you're a better player and win without any rule, feel free to pick that. You'd be a bit of a dick, but it would kind of be funny. But yeah, it actually depends on many things. So the first one is obviously the enemy faction. Like we just said then, if they're playing Chaos Demons, we're not going to be taking -1 save. If they're playing an army of 2-up saves like Custodes, -1 to save becomes a lot more valuable. But it doesn't just end there. Enemy unit composition matters massively too. You could play versus an army of Space Marines and think -1 save's great, because they're all 2-up saves or 3-up saves, so dropping that's going to be fantastic. But then they're playing like something like, God, I don't know, 18 Blade Guard veterans. Not saying it's good, but Blade Guard veterans having a 4+ invulnerable, giving them -1 save, means that every AP1 that you have is basically useless. You're basically just overkilling the unit. The AP doesn't do anything for you at that point, because you have access to lots of AP1 in Death Guard, so putting them on a 4-up naturally doesn't actually give you much difference. So in that instance, you might want to look at -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill. There are other instances that we're going to cover where maybe you consider the opposite way, but it is important to look at your enemies list, not just army. Look at the units they're bringing, look at the war gear they're equipped with, any enhancements that might give out things like bonuses. For example, enemy units can also have models that ignore ballistic skill modifiers, or minuses to hit, in which case, -1 ballistic skill, -1 weapon skill isn't going to be as powerful. So make sure you look at those, and again, a good general will be rewarded for his knowledge of the game, and you will avoid making the wrong choice. The third thing we need to consider is what's in your list, because there are times when -1 weapon skill and -1 ballistic skill sounds great. However, if your army is predominantly cultists and poxwalkers, for example, even with worse hit rolls, chances are those units are still going to die in droves when they're shot. So maybe in that instance, it's better to focus on reducing the opponent's ability to play the mission with the -1 leadership and OC. Now, obviously, that's quite a drastic example. No one's out here running 60 cultists and 90 poxwalkers, 60 poxwalkers. But it's an example. Knowing your list, the output that it can do, and the capacity to play both the mission and the units you have brought yourself is also going to dictate what you need to think about when you make this decision. So another thing we need to look at is the win condition of the game, not just yours but also your opponent's. For example, if you're against Necrons and they've brought lots of big bricks of Necron warriors, Lich Guard with invulnerables, but the Necron warriors have got Orokin for a 4+ invulnerable, their damage isn't that high, but they're not trying to kill you. So you don't want to take -1 save because they've all got 4+ invulnerables. Okay, so we're left with -1 weapon skill, -1 ballistic skill, -1 OC, and -1 leadership. So what's the choice to make? Well, we need to look at them and understand, like, Necron warriors in close combat are not really going to be dealing any damage, but they're not interested in dealing damage. And the Lich Guard, even to a lesser extent, aren't really the biggest, hardest hitters in the game. Mortarion could probably sit in combat with them all game and never die. But what they are there to do is for their win condition, which is to outscore you on primary. So in this case, yes, they are vulnerable to the -1 weapon skill, -1 ballistic skill. It would decrease their output into you, but it's not actually going to affect their win condition, because their win condition is stand on objective with more OC than you and outscore you. So in that instance, we need to understand that's their win condition, and then maybe we consider the -1 OC and -1 leadership. Especially if in your list you have brought stuff like Plague Marines. With OC2, it becomes a lot easier to bully off Necron warriors when you're reducing them to OC1. And then the last thing we always need to consider is terrain. Terrain is always important because terrain and its layouts creates choke points, firing lanes, naturally. For those who don't know, choke points are basically areas on the map that units that don't have breachable, so vehicles mainly and monsters, are forced to go between because they don't have the freedom to go through buildings. So if you manage to set it up in a position where your opponent's big scary knight can't go through a choke point without putting himself within contagion range, then you are basically telling your opponent, if you move, you will be subject to my contagion. And identifying the terrain and where that's going to be applicable is quite important. For example, if firing lanes are the same, but rather than space for moving through, which we would consider a choke point, a firing lane is where are the biggest lines of sight, lanes to fire down on the map. And if you can get to a position where for your opponent to get into a position to shoot down a firing lane, you can put him in contagion, then -1 weapon skill and -1 ballistic skill can become incredibly powerful because your opponent wants to kill a tank in your backfield, but the only way he can get an angle to shoot that tank would mean he's now within contagion range of a unit. That tank is then -1 ballistic skill. You can then combine that with other things to effectively give that tank -2 to hit. This disincentivizes your opponent to make that play, and in doing so, you have managed to save your tank without actually ever having to do any rolling of dice. You just positioned well, you cut off the firing lane and chose the right contagion, and all that combined has meant your opponent is no longer going to be threatening your backline. So that's another thing to consider. So first up to look at is Skull Squirm Blight. So this is the contagion that gives enemy units within range -1 weapon skill and -1 ballistic skill. So this is a very powerful contagion. A lot of people like to use this one as the go-to all-rounder. I don't particularly think there is such a thing as an all-rounder, but it's a fairly safe bet, this one. Most things in the game are subject to -1 ballistic skill and -1 weapon skill. It innately is a defensive contagion, so people who are more defensive playstyle minded are going to find better use out of this. It's also going to help bring back some of that durability feeling that maybe some players feel is missing with Death Guard. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to save you all the time, but there's a good chance, like with the -1 ballistic skill and weapon skill, it is going to reduce the damage your units take. Now, one important thing to note about this is because it is -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, it can stack with other sources of -1 to hit. Now, Aiden, I hear you say, that's not possible. I was told by my friend, and I read the book, and it said -1 to hit is the cap. After all modifiers anyway, it's the total cap. Well, you are correct, Jimmy. But Jimmy, -1 weapon skill and -1 ballistic skill is actually separate to -1 to hit, which means a unit can be both -1 ballistic skill. So if you're ballistic skill 4, you can go down to ballistic skill 5, for example, and then be subject to a -1 to hit through abilities such as stealth. And this means that you're now hitting on 6s. As you can imagine, going from hitting on 4s to hitting on 6s is a massive decrease in your damage output. This is incredibly powerful when you manage to stack it with other sources of -1 to hit. So Aiden, how do I get these magical sources of -1 to hit, do you ask me? Well, good question. There are multiple ways in our army to get -1 to hit. The most straightforward of them is the Cloud of Fly stratagem, which in the shooting phase for 1 command point gives one of our units the stealth keyword, which is -1 to be hit. So, as we said in that example before, your opponent has moved a tank up to get a line of sight. In doing so, he has put himself within contagion range of your pre-placed unit because you're very smart and ahead of the game. He is now going to shoot your tank. As soon as he targets your tank, you go, hold on there, bud. 1 command point, Cloud of Flies, -1 to be hit from ranged. You're now -2 to be hit, and your opponent goes, gah, as he gets very stressed because you have caught him out in your amazing ruse and your excellent foresight of knowing he was going to take that exact firing lane. And I don't feel sorry for you, Tau player. Screw you. But yeah, so as you can tell, stacking it is powerful. Another way we can stack -1 to hit, specifically in the combat phase, is we have allies in Nurgling units. And Nurglings actually project a 6-inch aura of -1 to be hit in close combat. Well, doesn't apply to monsters and vehicles, but still applies to the rest. Now this is actually hilarious because you can have Terminators and then have Nurglings behind a wall but within 6 inches, and if anyone charges your Terminators, they're going to be -1 to be hit and then -1 weapon skill, so they're -2 to hit your Terminators, which is an insane damage loss in close combat, which means they're going to bounce off and then you're going to swing back and basically do a lot more damage because you're going to have a lot more guys alive. Powerful. Cheeky things you can do with this is, for example, if your opponent has moved forward to declare a charge on Death Shroud, so for example, let's have a bit of a little example here. We have a wall. Can you see this? I'm just going to check the camera. Yeah, you have a wall here. You have Death Shroud on, maybe this side here, and your opponent's on this side, and they want to declare a charge at you. So at the end of their movement phase, they've moved forward to here. You know they're going to charge your Death Shroud because it's a melee unit that's moved within charge range. You, at the end of their movement phase, can rapid ingress Nurglings behind your Death Shroud Terminators, and now if they charge into those Death Shroud or Plague Marines or Blight Lords or whatever it is, they are out of nowhere now because they couldn't have seen it coming because no one expects you to rapid ingress Nurglings defensively. They're going to be -2 to hit, so they might not even take that charge. But if they don't take the charge, they're stood in the middle of nowhere and about to get shot and have got no value, so they're going to die. If they do take the charge and they whiff it, because -2 to be hit is going to really make the odds of them killing your unit a lot weaker, then there's a great chance that you then kill that unit on the swing back, and they basically threw away that melee unit for nothing. You hold the objective still, and you've killed their unit, so double win. Cheeky little things you can do. Typhus himself also comes with an innate -1 to be hit in close combat for his unit. So 20 Poxwalkers with Typhus being -2 to be hit in close combat. You can obviously give Cloud of Flies, potentially making stuff -2 to be hit at ranged. Incredibly hard to deal with. But you can also just join Terminators and have natural -2 to be hit Terminators in close combat. And again, you can find ways to make that apply at range. This also has other ways to be spread, but we'll get to them. Now, obviously, this is a huge counter to melee. Melee cannot play around this ability, and Stephen Box from Vanguard Tactics even described it as being unfair, and a lot of people gave him grief for that, but I actually kind of agree. There are ways to play around it. As a shooting army, you can measure 9.1 inches away, and you're safe, providing we don't have any extension abilities on. But there is counterplay, and it's up to the Death Guard player to try and shut down that counterplay with like firing lanes, etc., as you mentioned. But with melee, there's nothing they can do. To be in melee, you have to be within 3 minimum, and therefore you're subject to the -1 weapon skill. So this is extremely powerful versus melee matchups, especially if you come across some of the less good melee armies, like who are weapon skill 3, or dropping them to -2 to hit straight to 5s. If they're not an army that's packing rerolls, that's going to really struggle for them. Even dropping Custodes down to a 4 up to hit is just funny, because you get to tell a Custode player he's hitting on 4s, and that's a really good feeling, I won't lie. They won't believe you. You'll have to show them the rules like 4 times just for them to believe you. But when you do pull it off, it is, you get to look at a Custode player and be like, you're hitting on a guardsman. But yeah. Now, obviously, as I just said then, armies that don't have rerolls are more impacted by this. If armies have lots of rerolls, say Oaths of Moment, giving full rerolls on units, that means -1 or -2 to be hit is less impactful, because full rerolls actually makes a 5 up to hit somewhere between a 4 and a 3 to hit. So it's actually not as impactful as you think on there. However, if it's just reroll 1s, that's not too bad. But again, if you're against a faction that rerolls everything or has access to cheater dice like Fate dice or Miracle dice, sometimes this ability isn't the best because it can be worked around. Obviously, this gives us a massive durability buff. So if you are a defensive-minded player, this might be the contagion for you. It increases the survivability of all of our units. And you can do this by, pushing forward aggressively with other things. And in doing so, that will protect your units that are more holding the backline. So it's a great thing. So when to pick this? So we want to pick it when we're against armies that usually have that lower natural ballistic skill and weapon skill. This is because the effect is disproportionately more powerful the worse the unit is in the first place. Going from 4s to 5s is a big drop in damage. Going from 4s to 6s is basically you're dealing no damage. But going from 2s to 4s is going from doing all the damage to still doing a decent chunk of damage. So the lower their natural ballistic skill and weapon skill is, the more impact this has on an army. Now, obviously, if an army hits on 5s, not that any army does, it's probably overkill at that point. However, it's, like I said, if you're against stuff like Tau, ballistic skill 4, orcs who can have power claws at ballistic skill 4, anything like that, this can be quite nasty and quite a nasty way to shut down those armies. Melee, as we said, there's nothing they can do to avoid it, so it's quite a safe pick in melee matchups. I don't think it's an auto pick in melee matchups. However, like I said, there's no way they can play around it. You're always going to get value out of it. So if you're unsure on a matchup, but the matchup is basically melee, then it's a solid, easy auto lock and take, because you'll get value out of it without having to think at all. Maps with tight firing lanes, as we said before, you can put units to just shut down those firing lanes and really hamper your opponent's output. That's obviously brilliant for us. This is also great in missions where survival and scoring is more important than killing the opponent. Um, if you believe you can just outscore your opponent, so against maybe like knight matchups, for example, sometimes because they don't have enough knights to do actions and keep firing and doing all that thing, if you can focus on just surviving and scoring rather than killing their units, it's a good way to keep your guys around longer. So that's quite a nice use for it. It's also very good when you're the defender role. So one of the biggest skills in 40k is knowing who is the aggressor and who is the defender in a game. Knowing that requires experience, it's knowledge, and it's matchup based. Basically, the idea is who has to make the game state change in order to change who wins. So, for example, if you were sat on 3 objectives comfortably and you're scoring and you've got fixed secondaries and you can score them on the 3 you're on, then you have no incentive to push out further because you're going to win the game at that point. If nothing changes, you will score your points every turn and you will win the game. So that puts you in the defender role. You are under no obligation or no requirement to change the game state. Your opponent, however, will lose unless he changes the game state. This therefore forces him into an aggressor role. So he has to be aggressive to make something happen, to make the game state change, or he will or her will lose. So understanding this and knowing this before the game starts, that you are the defender, which Death Guard, to be fair, because of our indirect and our ability to force interaction from the opponent, we quite often find ourselves in the defender role. This is quite powerful because we can hunker down on our safe objectives, we can start scoring stuff like teleport homers, and we can say to our opponent, make something happen. And if they are an army that is melee, for example, sometimes the only thing they can do to make something happen is run into us and into our contagion range and potentially just break up on our walls. It can also force people to take those firing lanes that are bad for them because they have to make something happen. So understanding when you are the defender and when you need to play as the defender role in a matchup, this contagion is very powerful. So how can we maximize it? So as we said, stacking effects, Typhus, Nurglings, Cloud of Flies, Smoke Launchers, all brilliant to get to the maximum potential of -2 to be hit. Getting units into choke point, so this is great for stuff like cultists, which can scout move early turns to try and get there fast. Bloat drones are great for it too. Even rapid ingressing in to take areas of the board where it's going to be very important for traffic, for the opponent to put units to fire at others. Being able to contaminate and spread the contagion in those areas is massively important to capitalizing on debuffing your opponent. We also want to tag centerpiece/brick units. So centerpieces are units like Primarchs, like Magnus the Red, Angron. Being able to tag them, or like a big shooty knight, maybe they've got a Crusader or a Castellan or something like that. Being able to keep those guys in contagion range and then managing to stack that to -2 to hit, for example, can really shut down units that can cost nearly 500 points. And sometimes shutting down a unit is all you need to do. You don't have to kill something if it does nothing. You can ignore it. So this can be done by either fast units moving out and tagging them in contamination range, or with units like Hellbrutes. Hellbrutes can shoot, and then after they've shot, they can pick a unit that they have hit, and it will treat as within contamination range, which will apply this new contagion effect. So if your opponent has brought, like I said, a big 500 point knight, the Hellbrute gets a single hit on it, it's now -1 to be hit, and at any target that knight can shoot at then from then on for the next turn, you can just react with a 1 command point stratagem for Cloud of Flies, and now that knight is -2 to be hit. And having these big units shut down, or at least have their output reduced by such an amount, can really cripple some armies because they've built their entire army around this big unit doing lots of damage. For even Deathwing Knights, they hit on, I can't remember if they hit on freeze, I think they do. With the mace, it might even be fours actually, the mace of absolution. But if it's freeze, we'll say best case scenario for them, worst for us. My phone's dead, so I can't check. I'm sorry, I'm a failure of a video maker. Giving that unit -2 to be hit means that unit even if they try and do something as stupid as like infiltrating it, which they can do in the new Space Marine Codex, if it charges into you, if it's hitting on sixes, do we really care? Like, okay, charge into me, your 450 point unit, do nothing, and then I'll just kill you because you're not hurting me at all, and I'll just grind you down. So yeah, it's very good against these big centerpiece models, especially when they have lower weapon skill, lower ballistic skill, or you have the ability to tag them at range. Obviously, this also benefits us taking larger unit sizes. Reducing opponents' output is great because it allows larger units, so 10-man Blight Lord, 10-man Plague Marines, to survive being attacked. If a unit would normally before wipe out 5-man Plague Marines, -1 to be hit, they might still be able to kill enough Plague Marines to make that unit not functional. It doesn't deal enough damage back to threaten anything. It's still a fairly weak unit. However, if you bring a 10-man and now they only have enough damage to kill 3 models, the 7 that swing back, especially if you've got something like a Biologist Putrefier, will most likely be enough to severely damage or cripple or even outright kill the unit that attacked them. So this contagion actually gets more impact when you start running larger unit sizes. So that these are all things you need to think about using to get the most out of this contagion, and hopefully give you some ideas of, if you want to play with this contagion, ways to combo it and get the most use out of it. So, I'm going to drink a second. Sorry. So the next contagion is Rattle Joint Ague. This is the -1 to save. So obviously this is innately an offensive contagion. Lowering opponents' armor saves plus our ability to give, stuff extra AP for a command point has now made our army have absurdly high armor penetration. We're talking AP4 melee, up to AP5 potentially. We have AP potentially 6 melter, which is nuts. You can shoot a Land Raider in cover with a multi-melter per command point for the extra CP in contagion range, and that guy doesn't get a save. It's AP5 ignores the 2-up save, and then the extra AP from the contagion or from the stratagem ignores the benefit of cover, because AP6. So we have got one of the highest AP armies in the game now when we take this contagion, which has made a lot of our units much more deadly. Now this has a predominantly stronger impact, even though we just talked about AP6 melter. This ability actually is more powerful the weaker your weapon was in the first place. The most powerful AP in the game is usually AP1, because having no AP and 1 AP is almost like doubling damage, because especially when you shoot into 3-up armors, they're going from a 33% chance to fail a save to a 50% chance. It's massive. So one thing Death Guard has an abundance of is AP1 weaponry, mainly on our flamers. Flesh mowers as well, rot hail sluggers, sorry, not rot hail, heavy sluggers, things like that, heavy bolters even. Making those weapons AP2 drops most things in the game to 4-up invulnerables, so Terminators being shot by our anti-infantry 2+ flamers, which ignore cover, will go from AP1 to AP2 without any investment, just being within range of your target, which with flamers you need to be close anyway. That's an insane amount of extra efficiency put onto our weapon, and it makes it incredible versus armies that have a lot of 2+ saves. It also benefits weight of fire massively, because again, making your opponent roll more saves is more powerful the worse their ability to roll is. So by dropping 2-up saves to 3-up saves, for example, and then you force your opponent to roll 40 dice, they've gone from failing every 1 in 6 to failing at 1 in every 3. You've literally doubled your damage. So weight of fire starts to become a reasonable and powerful answer to those units. So yeah, even bolt guns at AP1, you can buff them to AP2, because you're again reducing save and plus 1 AP stratagem, become absurdly powerful. So it's very good. So when do we want to pick this one? Well, we want to pick this one mainly into enemies that have high armor saves. So this is things like Votan have a lot of high armor saves, a lot of 2-ups on the vehicle, like the Hecaton, but they don't have invulnerables, which is our second point. If an army lacks invulnerables, this becomes exceptionally more powerful because it means it's always going to get value. So Marines, especially the Primaris stuff, which tends to lack invulnerables, aggressors especially, really hate this contagion because you can just sweep and you can just pick up units so easily. So if an army has a lot of invulnerables, maybe don't consider this contagion. However, if they have a lack of invulnerables but good base saves, 3-ups, 2-ups, this becomes incredibly powerful. It's also important to take this one when you're looking to avoid attritional grinds. The Necron video we did recently, we talked about setting up one-turn kills. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this versus Necrons because they do tend to have a lot of invulnerables. However, in games where you don't want to get bogged down, so the opponent's got something like Deathwing Knights, for example. It's another example, sorry, of Deathwing Knights, but they're going to be everywhere soon. You don't want to get stuck trying to kill them for a couple turns. So managing to turn them to a 3-up save and then having all your AP1 flamers just make them put so much weight of dice on them that you can kill these units much faster than normal means you're not going to get bogged down and stuck somewhere trying to deal with units. So if you need to make sure you can keep being aggressive and keep moving on, and you don't want to be leaving knights on like 4 wounds on a war dog, that one over there is on 2 wounds, you just want it to die, then take this one, smash right through the armor, guarantee that damage, and kill those models dead. It is one of the highest impacts to damage you will see, and when you actually pull it off and start shooting things, the damage output is insane. I believe this is also more powerful for MSU lists. This is because MSU lists, so there's multiple small units or minimum sized units. So rather than going for like 6-man Death Shroud, you're taking 3-mans like I do. That's my personal style. I believe this is the most powerful contagion in general because it allows your units to punch up way easier. So your units can trade up even with the small squad sizes. Whereas -1 weapon skill, -1 with ballistic skill, it, like I said, it could save them, but that contagion wants you to take large units really to maximize how many guys will survive. Because the thing is, if a squad can run in and it normally would wipe 3 Death Shroud, and now a squad runs in and kills only 2 Death Shroud because of -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, I have 1 Death Shroud. It's not going to do much. So it's better for me instead to take the aggressive approach, be the one to charge them with a rapid ingress, and then boost my damage to points where it's AP4 in close combat, give the opponent no save on their unit, and just pick it up and kill it, because then my 125 point unit has much higher potential to trade up. As I said before, this is great for people taking the aggressor role. So if you need to make something happen, the best way to do that is by putting a lot of damage on your opponent, making sure when you do get in, because you're going to get shot on the way in, because you're going to have to be the one that takes the risks, takes the positions to get into your opponent, that you need to make sure when you connect, it deals a lot of damage. But once again, consider all the other things, invulnerables, what kind of saves do they have, do I need to stay alive, all these questions need to be answered first. So how do we maximize this one? So obviously Ferric Blight and Sanguinous Flux are 2 stratagems which work very well with this -1 save. Now, because of the nature of our AP now being absurd with this stratagem, Ferric Blight sometimes becomes overkill. Now, if you need to make sure he doesn't spike 6s and survives, then definitely pay Ferric Blight and make him take no save. But this actually puts more weight on extra attacks instead. Exploding 6s actually becomes more output than Ferric Blight because you're already getting to AP3 quite easily on stuff like heavy plague weapons because they're AP2 and then -1 save, effectively AP3. So Marines, for example, are only going to have 6-ups. So at that point, it's actually more beneficial to start looking into exploding 6s just to make more dice roll. Because as we said before, weight of dice in this contagion, it becomes more and more absurdly powerful. So consider that when you're using these stratagems, whereas you would normally prioritize Ferric Blight, maybe start prioritizing Sanguinous Flux. This also makes Boil Blight plays lethal. I almost call this Oaths of Moment for Death Guard, because Boil Blight requires a unit to be within contagion range, so naturally it's going to be -1 to save if you've taken this contagion. Now you're going to be getting +1 to hit because heavy and you won't move your Plague Burst Crawlers. And everything that shoots that target is also going to get ignore cover. So that's potentially an AP2 swing right there. Because you're going to have your opponent is no longer going to get cover. You're then going to give them additional -1 save. So that's an AP2 potential swing. And then something like the Plague Burst Crawler, that -1 AP naturally is going to kick in. So you have a unit, let's say, if it was a 4-up save vehicle, for example, behind a ruin. Normally, you would shoot him with this, and it would get a 4-up save. However, with Boil Blight and a Plague Burst Crawler shooting it, it's going to go down to a 5-up save, and then your Plague Burst Crawler's -1 is not going to get ignored, so it's actually going to go to a 6-up save. So this makes Boil Blight insanely powerful and really nasty when you manage to pull it off. This has also made the Icon Bearer bomb a lot more powerful. The Icon Bearer being a unit that once per game can increase his contagion range and that of any attached unit to 12 inches. A lot of people have been running this guy solo in a Rhino. You can, on the go turn, when you want to deal a lot of damage, he disembarks, he moves, he advances, because you can advance and do this ability, into the middle of the opponent's army, and then he raises the banner, and you can basically tag most of the opponent's army within contagion range. This allows you to make what we call go turns, which is the turn when you are deciding you're going to try and deal as much possible damage to your opponent and cripple them there and then. So having this guy manage to go in, tag all the units, means you can then shoot away with impunity, because you're going to be benefiting from the -1 save on those units on as many targets as possible. This is also great for multiple unit setups. Increasing your output allows you to maximize your damage, which means rather than just focusing one unit down with the damage you've got given, because your damage is now increased so much, you can actually set up to kill multiple units because less is being required to invest into each unit to kill. So this means if you set it up right and you get multiple units within contagion range, you're going to need much less output to kill those units, which means you can potentially pick up more units in the same turn. This also is benefited mainly by cheap activators. As we said, the Icon Bearer bomb is one of them. Cultists moving out, advancing, scouting, managing to get those early contagions onto key units is also massively important. You don't care if you lose 50 points if it allows you to do like a Boil Blight play and pick up 300 points. Also makes bloat drones very good because they're very fast. They naturally want to be aggressive anyway, especially if you've got flesh mowers and flamers. So them getting in there, they can flame something, charge something, all whilst potentially being near other units to set up multiple units for death. So yeah, very good. So the last contagion that we have is Scabrous Soul Rot. So this one is -1 OC and -1 leadership. This is a utility contagion and it's niche. It's very niche. There's not many times you're going to end up taking this one because by nature the other two are so impactful compared to this one, and the other two are so all-consuming, and most of the time they're going to have a use, that this one is going to be a very, very rare pick. However, what it can do is it can punish scoring lists. Some lists out there in the game aren't interested in fighting you. All they're interested in is scoring 100 points. A good example of this is Nid, Endless Swarm. It has some damage dealers, but mainly it's a lot of Gaunts and Gargoyles who are just focused on reducing your primary and maxing theirs and scoring for the win. Now, giving a Gaunt -1 ballistic skill and weapon skill does work. However, it's usually got a strength 4, 3, AP 0 weapon. You're not really scared. So reducing the damage of a unit that you're already not scared of is akin to doing nothing. However, Gaunts have like a 6-up save, so giving them -1 save, not really necessary. You know, a 6-up save dies as much as a 7-up save, and if you have AP 1 on anything, you're going to go straight through anyway. So in scenarios like that, you actually want to take this contagion, because if all they care about is scoring, denying you primary, and doing actions, which again you can't do if you're battle shocked, then having the ability to basically say, actually, no, your 20 gaunts are just 20 OC instead of 40, and I've covered this point in Plague Marine, so if you charge me, there's a good chance I'm going to kill more than 10, then I will still hold this point. So you cannot just run on this point and deny me primary. It's also going to be easier to battle shock units so that they can't do actions and score secondaries next turn. So this can also be important in matchups where battle shock matters. So again, if you really need to battle shock units to make them be OC 0, so you can score something like Storm Hostile Objective because you've took it as fixed, then this is going to be a more consistent way to use Plague Burst Crawls to battle shock, which means a single model can then tow onto an objective and take control of it, and therefore you will score your secondary. So yeah, it's a very strange one, and it's definitely a niche one, but it does have some uses. So when do you want to pick this one? Again, as we said then, low output, high scoring opponents. Another instance you might want to take this one is if you're going to be tabled. So you know you're going to die. So what you need to do, and you're not going to kill your opponent, like you don't have the ability, you don't have the tools. What you need to do, and your only hope of winning the game, is to basically score as much as you can in the first 3 turns, but more importantly, stop your opponent scoring. So in order to do this, it means you're going to have to be taking them off primary, and this is going to make that easier. Making any OC they have worse is going to allow you to more easily deny them the primary score. The -1 leadership is cuter in that one, but you're mainly looking at the -1 OC. And the idea is, if you can hold them to 0 primary, for example, for the first 3 turns, even if you then get tabled, hopefully you can deny them a little more in turn 4, and you've scored as much as you can. The idea is hopefully they're so far behind at that point that in the last 2 turns, even if they score everything, they can't catch you up. Now this is a Hail Mary of a play. It's very unlikely to work, and it's very unlikely to happen that you find yourself in this scenario, but it is one thing to consider if you do find yourself in this scenario. However, if you are in this scenario, Gambit is looking pretty fun. But yeah, it can happen. Also, sometimes there's just no better option. Again, as we said before, maybe they've got lots of invulnerables, maybe it's demons or they're all invuln, but maybe they've gone some weird build where they're not actually dealing damage. It's all, I don't know, Brimstone Horrors. They've gone full Brimstone Horrors, full Blue Horrors, Plague Bearers. It's all just for scoring. None of it deals any damage. In which case then, yeah, I guess you pick this by default because the other two just aren't doing anything. But again, do remember this one is very, very niche. So here's some little suggestions. Now these aren't hard rules, as we'll see in a second, but these are some. If you don't know the game or you're new to the game, these are some fairly safe ones to take. So against demons before, and again this isn't all the armies, it's just some suggestions, so you can sort of see why. Against demons, minus weapon skill and ballistic skill. Demons as an army is primarily melee, so that means they want to get in close. Demons as an army does not take armor saves, they only have invulnerable saves, therefore the other one is useless. And demons at the moment are running lots of large monsters, so they're trying to kill you, not necessarily take you off objectives. Therefore, -1 OC in leadership is not going to help making that Bloodthirster OC 4 instead of 5. He's still going to kill you. So instead, try and reduce his output. Tau as well, being a natively ballistic skill 4 faction, managing to set up those firing lanes, deny them some ability to impact you, can be quite powerful. Now obviously they do get sustained hits later on, so it's as the game goes on, it's going to get less value. So maybe this is an instance where you take -1 ballistic skill and weapon skill and actually be aggressive with it, because exploding effects obviously negate minus ballistic skill and weapon skill because 6s count as 2 hits. So sometimes they'll just be fishing for 6s anyway. But that may be an example where you want to get aggressive with it, making them hit you on 5s, and then even worse in close combat, it's like 6s, I think. Can allow you to get engaged close, get in engagement range, move up the field without taking too many losses, and hopefully deny them that scoring early because Tau have a massive power spike later in the game. Orcs, melee faction again, not too many rerolls I believe, but power claws being stuff like weapon skill 4, etc., can be really shut down by this. However, orcs could be another large consideration for OC if they're just taking lots of boys and all they're looking to do is take you up objectives, not really too worried about killing you. But in general, orcs having a ballistic skill of 5 going to 6s, they aren't hitting anything ever again, basically, at that point. And managing to drop orc weapon skill is also quite powerful because they have usually a lot of attacks, but you can give it -2 weapon skill if you set it up correctly. And dropping orcs to 6s to hit with power claws or 5s to hit on basic dudes, it really just hampers them. Even with weight of dice, you have good armor saves, you'll be okay against it. And World Eaters, obviously World Eaters being the primary melee army that's going to rush you down, managing to get their insane damage and potentially cut it in half is incredibly powerful, as you could imagine. I don't need to repeat myself on that. Obviously, versus melee, -1 skill, -1 ballistic skill, pretty good. -1 to save, I generically take it versus Marines. A lot of Marine units don't have invulns, like Terminators and whatnot. They have good saves though, 2-ups, 3-ups, so being able to take that down and just pick up units much easier is quite nice. Means you can churn through Marine bodies quicker, especially all the new vehicles like Redemptors and stuff, which are their 2-up saves. Dropping them to 3-up is very important. Trying to deal with multiple 2-up save vehicles is a nightmare, but 3-up saves is a lot more stomachable. Sisters have miracle dice, so when they need to connect with certain hits, then they're going to be able to, because they're just going to use a miracle dice for it, such as melter guns and whatnot. However, miracle dice they can use on saves, but miracle, if you have enough AP, again, close combat, 3-up armor save, you can get up to AP 4 or even 5. They can't miracle dice a roll that they can't physically make. So if they need to make a 7 and they can't miracle dice it, means they die. Also means your flamers are going to be much more powerful. They can put a lot of 3-up save bodies on the field. Only toughness 3, but having AP 1 on those flamers is going to really help clear out those big sister units. Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines don't give a single toss about -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, because they have plenty of rules that allow them to get exploding and lethal hits on 5s to hit. So a lot of the times, Chaos Space Marines will be re-rolling anything that isn't a 5 or a 6 anyway. So you dropping them from hitting on 3s to 5s, they don't care, that's what they were going for anyway. So it has no effect there. Your best bet is to try and kill them. CSM have absurd damage output. However, we can also have absurd damage output back. So it can be a very nasty, very, very lethal game versus CSM, and both armies picking up unit after unit. Votan have lots of 2-up armor saves with no invulns, such as the Half Guard, if they don't take the Shield Crest, and the Hecaton Land Fortress, Sagittars as well, 3-up save, 2-up save vehicles with no invulnerables, get a lot of value out of it there. And Custodes, obviously an entire army of 2-up saves, really doesn't like it when you're having your flamers dropping them to their invulnerable. They don't have enough wounds or models to be able to sustain that much weight of fire, and as soon as you start picking them up with the weakest of weapons that you have, and they have to basically fear and respect even the weakest weapons you have, Custodes can't really play much into that. It's very rough for them. And lastly, -1 OC in leadership. That's quite good against Necrons. Again, they're not really caring about killing you. They just want to play their mission. They just want to play their objectives. So if you have a list that can match them on OC, like Plague Marines, it's not the worst shout in the world. And as we said before, like a Horde style of Endless Swarm Tyranids who are just using lots of gaunts. Again, stop them denying you your primary, stop them scoring as well. So yeah, there's some suggestions. However, the reason I've included this is I just said to you, -1 weapon skill, -1 ballistic skill. However, I went against this list at LGT, World Eaters obviously, Angron, Khan, Lord Invocatus, Demon Prince, Juggernaut Lord, 2x10 Jackals, 2x10 Khorne Berserkers, 2x5 Khorne Berserkers, 3 8-bound and 3 Exalted 8-bound. And I actually didn't follow my own advice a second ago. I took -1 save. The reason I did that is because I run MSU, and these are large units, especially the Berserkers, and all the characters hit really hard. If any of those units connect with any of mine, because I'm running small squads, even with -1 ballistic skill, weapon skill, they're going to wipe out the entire unit. which basically means the contagion did nothing. However, he has a lot of models, a lot of berserkers, 30 berserkers to be exact, with 3 up armor saves and nothing else. So the logic in my head was a dead man deals no damage. So if I can kill him harder than he can kill me, then his damage falls apart very quickly. And that's actually what happened in the game. I managed to pull off a Boil Blight onto a 10-man Berserker squad first turn. I managed to pick up the entire unit. As you can imagine, that's a huge gain for me. Whereas if that 10-man squad would have managed to charge into something of mine, they would have easily killed it. This is here as an example to prove when people ask what do I take versus X faction, there's not actually always a right answer. There is a right answer, but it's not always a same answer. It really does depend what you've got, what they've got, playstyles, list archetypes, and I hope this is an example to prove that even though I just said a second ago, -1 ballistic skill, -1 weapon skill, in this instance, that would have been the wrong choice, and only me knowing my list, what it can stand up to, and understanding the damage output his list can do, and the armor saves of his army, I managed to make the right choice and destroyed this army by picking apart that weakness and not just autopiloting and locking in -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill. So a quick note as well, with all the changes, we got some most improved units. I believe the Icon Bearer went from 0 to hero. That aura of 12 inches, giving off -1 toughness before, who gives a shit? However, now that aura giving -1 toughness and one of these new contagions is incredibly powerful, especially since he also went down in points, so he's massively improved. The Hellbrute is still a bit expensive, but being able to tag these contagions from range, because those contagions are so impactful, they can almost be like a little, again, you mark it for death, the Hellbrutes hit you, here comes the Boil Blight, here comes the Plague Burst Crawlers, unit deleted. So he's still quite expensive, but again, another massive winner. Bloat drones in general, their points went down to 100 points, so they are a massive winner from point drops, but also them going up the field fast before was just nice to have a fast unit. However, now they are fast and spreading these very important contagions. So they're a massive winner in my books from the changes that happened, because they can move forward, do some damage, possibly improve damage, be harder to kill if they've managed to get in the way of stuff or in combat with stuff, and also potentially increase the damage output of the rest of your army by spreading that contagion early. Plague Marines, the points drop they got was insane. 16 points for a Plague Marine is absurd. The new contagions make them both more survivable in close combat and also more lethal in close combat, depending on the matchup you need. Imagine charging into a unit that is fights first with a Foul Blight spawn and a -2 to be hit because of a cheeky rapid ingress Nurglings. You're just not doing it. Sometimes you're going to have 10 Plague Marines on a point of a Foul Blight spawn that just can't be interacted with, and that is one of the most powerful things in the game, is to have a unit that your opponent just cannot interact with. It's why Lone Op is so powerful. And Blight Lords are still a bit of a contentious subject. A lot of people still down on Blight Lords, think they don't deal any damage. However, this has massively improved their ability to either stay alive, which is kind of what you want Blight Lords to do, but it also fixed their damage output issues a bit. AP0 bolt guns are shit. AP1 bolt guns are actually okay. It's not the worst thing. It also means they're AP3 in melee, and they have quite a lot of attacks, and as we said before, weight of dice with these bonuses is actually quite nice and quite powerful. Therefore, they have gained proportionally higher into this. Death Shroud were already killing most things they touched anyway, so them getting an extra AP is, again, still really good. You're never going to complain, but they didn't necessarily need it as much. Whereas the Blight Lords getting it helps their output issues quite a lot. So I just wanted to quickly as well go over the do's and don'ts. I made a lot of do's and don'ts in part 1, and I think they need updating. So some of them are still true. Don't tank your opponent. Even with these changes, don't stand in the middle of nowhere and get your ass blown off the table. We still don't have stuff like Feel No Pain or Damage Reduction. You're not always going to be able to get stuff in contagion range to reduce their output. So please don't still stand in the open objectives. Play it smart. Don't be a muppet. And don't throw away Morty still. Morty still isn't the fire and forget cruise missile he used to be. You've still got to play smart with him, so that bit hasn't changed. use him as a support piece, and learn when to unleash him or learn when to throw him in. Learn when you need to sacrifice Morty, but don't just have Morty on the lines, go, go, go every game. Don't think we're broken. These changes are massively impactful and made us a lot more powerful. However, we are far, far, far from broken. We still have lots of defined weaknesses with movement and things like that. Durability is still not massively high, although it is helped. We have a lot more units to play with. However, we don't have absurd units. Tau, Votan. So still, you've got to play it smart. And for the love of God, don't take a Plague Surgeon. Like, seriously. If you take a Plague Surgeon, Don Huson, and you manage to do well with it, let me know, because I'm just gonna pretend you're lying and I'm gonna besmirch your name across the internet and call you a cheater, and that's how you did it. I will destroy you. I will destroy your entire life. I mean it. But yeah, don't take a Plague Surgeon. But do now. This has changed. We said before, don't melee because melee was bad. However, with our points changes and the point below, which is now do bring Virions because Plague Marines are so cheap, they're actually now really good. It means the Virions can attach to them because you don't feel as bad paying 450 points for a Rhino or something stupid with 10 guys in it and a Virion. It's actually very good now. Melee is good for us. It's a good place to be because we want to spread those contagions. Being in melee with units means they're within contagion range. Even if they're shooting units, if they have to fall back, it's unlikely they can move at least 10, which means you can keep them in contagion range, which is great. So do emphasize on trying to get into melee. Don't be stupid. Don't run in the open, but it's a good place to try and be. Bring Virions now. Virions such as Foul Blightspawn and Biological Putrefier are fantastic. Do not bring a Plague Surgeon, but Biological Putrefier especially has him and Plague Marines absolute blender every unit. Still play for the mission. Obviously, mission points win games. Win by 1 point, win the game. That's how it goes. So don't forget to play for objectives and missions. Do emphasize spreading contagion. Before, we emphasized being very tradey and not sending stuff out for free, because sending a unit out to put -1 toughness on a unit was okay, but not really massive. But now sending like cultists out to tag -1 toughness and -1 save can just basically give a mark for death onto a unit. So any chance you get to put units in contagion, really consider trying to do it. And really, guys, I want to emphasize now, experiment. We are in such a good position as an army. We're not broken, but we're solidly strong. We have so many viable units. We probably have one of the most balanced and viable unit rosters in the game right now. There is lots to try. Lots unexplored. Try out things, just not the Plague Surgeon. Try Bloat Drones, try Blight Haulers, try Cultists, try Zombies, try Blight Lords, try Death Shroud, try PVCs, try everything. Try Rhino Rush, try MSU, try Terminator Skew. Bring allies along, because allies can benefit from our contagions. If an enemy unit is -1 save and you shoot a knight at it, it's still -1 save. So that knight's technically getting an extra AP. All these things you can do to experiment and try right now. It's such a good time to be a Death Guard player, and I'm starting to speak fast because I'm getting excited. But yeah, thank you for listening. I know this was a bit of a short one, but I just really wanted to give like an update to part 1 to make sure like all the information you've seen is up to date. On the screen now is all my fantastic members who have supported me, allowed me to get this microphone. Hopefully the audio has been really nice and clear. The support you guys are giving me and the speed the channels grew over the last couple of months has honestly blown me and Will away. We massively appreciate it. If you do want to support us, please consider leaving a like, subscribe, or if you really want to support us, hit that join button, become a Plague Marine, get access to our Discord, vote on content coming up. We might even consider putting up some merch at some point. We've got some test shirts being done by ATK, who's done our art. But yeah, just tuning in. Thank you so much. Thank you again to the Nurgle's Mansion Discord. All the pictures in these videos are from the Nurgle's Mansion Discord and from our own one now. I really appreciate you guys letting me use your models. Hopefully it makes it more attractive to watch rather than just stock GW images. And it's a little way for me to give back to the community that's given me so much. We have a second page of members now, which is insane. It keeps growing. So please, again, feel free to join. Become one of these names on here. become a Plague Marine. Check the community tab if you do on the YouTube. And we have other content. Check out the other content. Like I said, that interview recently, the 2 4-1 players at LGT, fantastic. Totally different list to what I run. Was a blast to listen to. Check out the stupid tier list stream. We've got more content coming up. Allies list building coming up. We've got another episode of Perfect Plague Fort. Unfortunately, it looks like Eldar's won the vote, so it's going to be on Eldar for my punishment. You guys will like it, hopefully. And just leave any feedback in the comments. I really try and read and reply to all of them. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Faction Fundamentals. Much love. Stay rotten, everyone. I'll catch you later. Thank you. Goodbye.